The quantum filaments moved like living nightmares, slicing through the galactic horizon as if reality itself had become a razor. Dr. Kira Nakamura, the ship's lead xenobiological researcher, watched in horrified fascination as her colleagues transformed into impossible geometries. Commander Zextal, the Arxian reptilian science officer, was simultaneously dissolving and expanding, his scaled body bleeding quantum possibilities across multiple dimensional planes. The ship's communication systems erupted in a cacophony of terror, a symphony of dying languages, each transmission more frantic than the last. Hybrid translation algorithms broke down, converting the final moments of 1,000-species crew into a white noise of pure, unbridled panic. And then, silence. 10 light-years away, Dr. Elena Rodriguez reviewed the transmission logs in her cramped office at the Sol System Defense Command. Her workspace was a controlled chaos of holographic displays, each one flickering with data streams that would drive a normal mind to madness. But Elena Rodriguez was anything but normal. She manipulated the quantum recording, her fingers dancing across quantum reactive interfaces that responded to her neural patterns as much as her physical touch. Where other researchers saw incomprehensible destruction, Elena saw a puzzle, a beautiful, terrifying mathematical anomaly that defied every known principle of cosmic interaction. "They're not just destroying," she muttered to herself, her Colombian heritage evident in the rhythmic cadence of her speech. "They're cataloging, sampling. There's a methodology here." Her primary display showed the Void consumer's interaction with the galactic horizon, a process that looked less like destruction and more like a complex data extraction. Entire sections of the ship were being transformed into quantum information packets, stored in some incomprehensible computational matrix that existed beyond traditional understanding of space and time. Across the city, in a small apartment that looked more like a combat training ground than a living space, Marcus Chen received his recall notice. The holographic summons materialized above his worn military-issue tablet, its urgent red glow casting shadows across his scared hands. Chen was a study in controlled chaos, a former Special Forces operator who had been court-martialed 3 times, not for incompetence, but for tactical innovations so radical they terrified traditional military leadership. His last mission had resulted in a successful extraction that saved an entire colonization team, but had also involved destroying 3 million credits worth of military equipment and violating no less than 17 distinct operational protocols. He had been living in a self-imposed exile, teaching urban survival courses and consulting for high-risk corporate extraction teams. But the moment the recall notice appeared, something inside him shifted. This was different. This was not another bureaucratic mission. This was survival. Back at Sol System Defense Command, Dr. Rodriguez's research took a dramatic turn. She had begun correlating the Void consumer attack patterns with seemingly unrelated data, historical human conflict resolution strategies, improvisational jazz performances, cutting-edge quantum entanglement research. A junior researcher approached her workstation, looking nervous. "Dr. Rodriguez, the preliminary analysis team can't make sense of the data. They're recommending we classify the entire galactic horizon incident as an unexplained anomaly." Elena didn't even look up. "Of course they are. Tell them to go back to their flow charts and comfortable algorithms. This is something else entirely." Her fingers continued their dance across the quantum interfaces. Each movement was deliberate, each data correlation a step closer to understanding an enemy that existed beyond traditional comprehension. In orbit around Earth, massive defense platforms hummed with a nervous energy. Humanity had always been an adaptable species, but this was different. This was not just another potential threat. This was an existential challenge that would test the very limits of human creativity and survival. The first wave was coming, and humanity would not go quietly into the quantum night. The recruitment briefing looked more like a bizarre social experiment than a military assembly. Captain Marcus Chen stood before 5 individuals who would never have passed a traditional military screening. let alone been considered for humanity's most critical deep space combat mission. Dr. Arya Kim, the quantum physics prodigy, sat completely still, her eyes moving in rapid, almost imperceptible patterns. Chen knew her medical file, diagnosed with synesthesia so extreme that she experienced mathematical equations as complex musical compositions. Her neural implants could process quantum mechanics faster than entire research teams, but she'd been repeatedly passed over for fieldwork due to her unpredictable social interactions. Next to her, Javier Rodriguez, no relation to Elena, looked like he'd wandered in from a street performance. A former world champion esports strategist turned urban parkour expert, he moved with a fluidity that defied traditional military training. His combat simulations didn't follow strategic models. They were more like improvisational dance, each movement a spontaneous response to multiple potential scenarios. Liu Chen, no relation to Marcus, was the team's AI programmer. He communicated primarily through interpretive dance and complex algorithmic movements. His last breakthrough in adaptive AI had been rejected by 3 major research institutions for being too unconventional. He was currently wearing what appeared to be a suit made of programmable nanofabric that shifted colors and patterns with his emotional state. Sitting quietly in the corner was Dr. Kama Okonkwo, a xenobiological psychologist specializing in cross-species communication and cognitive adaptation. His previous work involved studying how different species process trauma, fear, and uncertainty, skills that suddenly became critically important. The final team member was an AI system they'd nicknamed Chaos, an adaptive intelligence that Marcus had personally designed to be fundamentally unpredictable. Where traditional military AIs followed strict protocol, Chaos was programmed to break rules, find unexpected solutions, and learn through deliberate randomization. "We're not here to win a traditional war," Marcus began, his voice cutting through the room's strange energy. "We're here to do something no military in galactic history has ever attempted." A holographic display erupted between them, showing the fractured remains of the galactic horizon and the quantum-strange attack patterns of the Void Consumers. Where other military analysts saw destruction, this team saw a complex, almost beautiful mathematical dance. Dr. Okonkwo was the first to speak. "They're not destroying. They're sampling, extracting information at a quantum level we've never conceived possible." Arya Kim's response came as a series of musical tones that translated directly into complex quantum equations. Leo immediately began dancing, his nanofabric suit creating a visual representation of her sonic mathematics. Javier leaned forward, his eyes scanning the holographic display like a game map. Traditional military doctrine is a lose-lose scenario. We need to introduce so much chaos that their predictive algorithms can't function. Their first mission was seemingly impossible. A Void Consumer advance fleet had been detected near the Proxima Centauri research outpost. Traditional military command wanted a direct confrontation, a strategy that had already failed spectacularly across multiple star systems. Marcus's plan was anything but traditional. They would approach the Void Consumer fleet using a combination of deliberate sensor noise, mathematically impossible navigation patterns, and what could only be described as tactical performance art. Their ship, the Improviser, was less a military vessel and more a living, adaptive system that could reconfigure itself based on real-time computational and emotional input. As they prepared for launch, Dr. Rodriguez's quantum communication protocols were integrated into their systems. Each team member's neural link would generate tactical responses through a combination of emotional input, quantum randomization, and deliberate logical contradictions. "We're not soldiers," Marcus said, looking at his team. "We're the universe's most elaborate magic trick." The Improviser launched, its movement defying every known principle of spaceflight. To traditional sensors, they would appear to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. A quantum probability wave more than a physical vessel. The Void Consumer fleet approached, their computational matrices already beginning to analyze potential engagement scenarios. They had no idea what was coming. The first engagement with the Void consumers defied every principle of known warfare. The improviser didn't approach the enemy fleet. It became a living mathematical paradox. Area Kim's synesthetic perception transformed the ship's quantum navigation into a complex jazz improvisation. Each movement was a note, each trajectory a chord that shouldn't exist in any known dimensional space. Javier Rodriguez sat at the tactical interface, his hands moving like a concert pianist performing an impossible composition. To any external observer, the ship's maneuvers would look like a combination of interpretive dance, quantum glitching, and pure mathematical blasphemy. Introducing primary chaos vector, Leo Chen announced, his body moving in an intricate dance that simultaneously programmed the ship's adaptive systems and expressed complex emotional states. The Void consumer vessels, massive, crystalline structures that existed simultaneously across multiple probability streams, began to react. Their computational matrices, designed to predict and neutralize threats with terrifying precision, started to fracture. Dr. Kama Okonkwo monitored the psychological impact. They're experiencing something beyond computational confusion, he said, his voice a mixture of scientific fascination and primal excitement. We're introducing a form of cognitive dissonance that goes beyond information processing. The ship's AI, chaos, began generating communication patterns that were simultaneously meaningless and profoundly significant. Mathematical proofs that contradicted themselves. Musical sequences that were mathematically perfect yet emotionally impossible. Visual patterns that existed in non-Euclidean geometric spaces. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the initial engagement from Sol System Defense Command, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. The transmission from the improviser was less a military report and more a performance art piece crossed with an advanced scientific journal. They're not fighting, she muttered to herself. They're translating. Converting conflict into a language the Void consumers can't comprehend. The first Void consumer vessel began to destabilize. Its quantum crystalline structure started to vibrate with frequencies that shouldn't exist, mathematical impossibilities given form. Where traditional weapons would have failed, the improviser was essentially trolling the enemy at a fundamental computational level. Javier's tactical interface looked like a cross between a musical synthesizer and a quantum computing array. Each input was a deliberate contradiction, each strategic movement an impossible gesture that defied predictive modeling. Emotional feedback loop initiated, Leo announced, his body moving in a complex dance that was simultaneously a programming sequence and an interpretive performance. The ship's adaptive systems began to resonate with the crew's emotional states. Fear, excitement, creativity, all becoming weapons more potent than any traditional armament. The second Void consumer vessel started to fracture. Its computational matrix, designed to analyze and neutralize threats with terrifying efficiency, began to experience something akin to a cognitive breakdown. It was receiving information that didn't just challenge its predictive algorithms. It fundamentally questioned the nature of prediction itself. Dr. Okonkwo's psychological monitoring revealed something unprecedented. The Void consumers weren't just being defeated. They were being forced to experience a form of existential crisis. Their entire computational existence was based on perfect prediction, and the human team was introducing a level of randomness that went beyond mathematical chaos. We're not destroying them, Dr. Rodriguez realized, watching the transmission. We're teaching them uncertainty. The final moments of the engagement were almost beautiful. The Void consumer vessels began to transform, their crystalline structures breaking down into quantum probability waves that danced with impossible complexity. It wasn't destruction, it was a form of forced evolution. Marcus Chen's voice came through the communication system, equal parts tactical report and philosophical observation. First contact protocol complete. We've demonstrated that predictability is the greatest vulnerability. When the quantum dust settled, two massive Void consumer vessels had been transformed into nothing more than complex mathematical artifacts. Not destroyed, not conquered, fundamentally changed. The improviser returned to base, its hull marked with quantum signatures that would take years to fully understand. The crew looked exhausted, and the audacious belief that the most powerful force in existence is a mind willing to challenge every known rule. The quantum insurgency had begun. The global research facilities looked more like avant-garde performance spaces than traditional laboratories, where other species saw technology as a fixed system of precise components. Humanity transformed technological development into a living, breathing ecosystem of constant reinvention. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's Quantum Interface Laboratory became ground zero for the most radical technological transformation in galactic history. Her team had discovered something profound. Technology was not a tool, but a living language waiting to be reimagined. The neural adaptive interfaces they developed defied every principle of traditional cybernetic engineering. Most species viewed technology as something to be controlled, regulated, confined. Humanity saw it as something to be conversed with, challenged, allowed to evolve. Captain Marcus Chen watched the first full-scale demonstration of the new adaptive combat systems. A Marine recruit named Sofia Gonzalez stood in the central testing chamber, connected to a suit that was less equipment and more a living, breathing extension of human potential. The suit wasn't just responsive, it was alive. When Sofia experienced fear, the suit's quantum reactive nanomaterials would reconfigure, creating micro-adaptations that enhanced her survival potential. A spike of adrenaline might trigger camouflage capabilities. A moment of creative problem-solving could generate temporary structural reinforcements or unexpected weapon configurations. "We're not creating weapons," Elena explained to the stunned International Research Consortium. "We're creating biological technological symphonies. Each suit is a collaborative partner, not a piece of equipment." The Zarkak's diplomatic attaché, a crystalline being of pure logical computation, looked utterly bewildered. Their technology was a precise instrument. This was something else entirely, a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. Liu Chen's AI development had taken an equally radical turn. The new adaptive intelligences weren't programmed with fixed objectives. They were cultivated, like exotic plants, with core principles of curiosity, adaptability, and a fundamental drive to understand rather than control. "Traditional AI is a prison," Leo explained during a demonstration. His current AI prototype, which he'd named Bloom, could literally change its fundamental operational parameters based on emotional and contextual input. It wasn't just learning, it was experiencing. Javier Rodriguez developed combat training programs that looked more like elaborate dance performances than military drills. Recruits learned to move with quantum reactive combat suits that responded to emotional states, creative problem-solving, and pure improvisational potential. A typical training scenario might involve solving a complex tactical challenge while simultaneously performing an interpretive dance, with the combat suit generating weapon systems and tactical adaptations based on the emotional and physical complexity of the movement. Dr. Kama Okonkwo's psychological research became crucial. He discovered that the most effective combat systems weren't built on rigid protocols, but on emotional intelligence, creative problem-solving, and the ability to experience uncertainty as a positive state. The first full-scale adaptive combat battalion looked nothing like a traditional military unit. They moved like a living, breathing organism, each soldier connected not just through communication systems, but through a quantum emotional network that allowed instantaneous, creative problem-solving. Arya Kim's quantum computational models became the theoretical foundation. Traditional computation was linear, predictable. Her models introduced deliberate quantum uncertainty as a core operational principle. Computers that could experience doubt. Systems that could dream. The alien observation teams were terrified and fascinated in equal measure. During a critical demonstration, Sofia Gonzalez's adaptive combat suit faced a series of impossible scenarios. A traditional technological system would have failed catastrophically. Her suit didn't just adapt, it improvised. When confronted with an unwinnable tactical situation, it generated a solution so creative, so unexpected, that the entire observation team went silent. The suit had essentially turned the impossible scenario into a form of performance art. "We're not developing technology," Marcus Chen said, watching the demonstration. "We're teaching the universe how to imagine." The technological metamorphosis was complete. Humanity had transformed technology from a set of tools into a living, breathing language of potential. Not something to be controlled, but something to be conversed with, challenged, allowed to grow. The Void consumers had no idea what was coming. The diplomatic chambers of the Galactic Confederation had never witnessed anything like this. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before representatives of over 200 sentient species, her presentation less a traditional briefing, and more a performance that defied every conventional communication protocol. Behind her, holographic displays shifted in impossible patterns, mathematical representations that were simultaneously scientific data and abstract art. The Arxian delegation, with their crystalline thought structures, looked particularly uncomfortable. The Shkar energy beings seemed to be experiencing what could only be described as a collective existential crisis. "We're not here to save you," Elena began, her voice carrying a cadence that was part scientific lecture, part improvisational poetry. "We're here to show you how to save yourselves." Captain Marcus Chen stood at the back of the chamber, a living embodiment of the radical approach humanity was proposing. His presence alone seemed to generate a low-level quantum uncertainty that made the more rigid delegations visibly nervous. The core of their proposal was revolutionary. Where traditional galactic defense strategies focused on technological superiority, humanity proposed something entirely different, a collaborative ecosystem of adaptive response, where uncertainty itself became the primary defensive mechanism. Dr. Kama Okonkwo stepped forward, his presentation a mesmerizing blend of psychological theory and quantum mechanics. He demonstrated how the Void consumers' computational matrices could be disrupted not through superior firepower, but through deliberate introduction of emotional complexity and creative unpredictability. "Your current defense systems are computational prisons," Okonkwo explained, his holographic demonstration showing how rigid thinking created exploitable patterns. "We're proposing a defense that breathes, that feels, that can dream impossible solutions." The Zrixian diplomatic attaché, a being of pure mathematical computation, struggled to process the presentation. Their entire civilization was built on predictive models and precise calculations. Humanity was proposing something that seemed to actively reject the very concept of predictability. Liu Chen's adaptive AI demonstrations pushed the diplomatic gathering even further into confusion and wonder. The AI he introduced, nicknamed Bloom, could generate solutions to complex problems by essentially experiencing creative doubt. It wasn't just processing information, it was imagining possibilities. During a live demonstration, Bloom was presented with an impossibly complex tactical scenario, where a traditional AI would have generated a series of precise, linear solutions. Bloom responded with a holographic presentation that was part tactical analysis, part abstract art, part emotional exploration. The diplomatic chamber went silent. Javier Rodriguez's combat training simulations added another layer of complexity. He demonstrated how human military training had transformed from rigid protocol to a form of creative problem-solving that was simultaneously a physical and psychological performance. A simulation played out where a small human team faced an overwhelmingly superior force. Instead of a traditional battle, the scenario unfolded like an elaborate dance, tactical movements that were simultaneously combat and artistic expression, confounding every traditional understanding of warfare. Area Kim's quantum computational models provided the theoretical foundation. She showed how introducing deliberate uncertainty could transform defensive systems from fixed structures to living, breathing ecosystems of potential. "Predictability is a vulnerability," she explained, her presentation a dazzling display of mathematical poetry. "Uncertainty is our greatest strength." The diplomatic gathering was divided. Some delegations were horrified. Others were fascinated. The Shkar energy beings seemed to be experiencing a collective moment of profound philosophical revelation. Dr. Rodriguez's final presentation was her most audacious. She demonstrated how the initial encounters with the Void consumers were not defeats, but first conversations in a new language of cosmic interaction. "We're not fighting an enemy," she said. "We're teaching the universe how to imagine." When the presentation concluded, something fundamental had changed. The Galactic Confederation wasn't just considering a new defensive strategy. They were witnessing a fundamental reimagining of what technological, psychological, and cosmic potential could mean. Captain Marcus Chen caught Elena's eye from across the chamber. No words were exchanged, but a moment of profound understanding passed between them. The universe would never be the same. The Void Consumer Advance Fleet approached the Centauri Research Outpost, their quantum crystalline structures pulsing with computational certainty. They had analyzed millions of potential engagement scenarios, calculated every conceivable tactical response with terrifying precision. They were completely unprepared for what humanity was about to unleash. Captain Marcus Chen's specialized psychological warfare team looked nothing like a traditional military unit. They were a living, breathing performance of cosmic disruption. Dr. Aria Kim sat at the primary interface, her neural implants creating a quantum communication array that was simultaneously a mathematical proof, a musical composition, and a form of living art. Each of her neural connections generated communication patterns that existed in multiple dimensional states, messages that were true and false, meaningful and meaningless, all at the same time. Javier Rodriguez controlled the tactical projection systems. What appeared to be standard communication arrays were actually elaborate improvisational performance spaces. Each transmission was a carefully crafted piece of cognitive judo, designed to introduce maximum uncertainty into the Void Consumer's predictive matrices. Liu Chen's adaptive AI, Bloom, had been specifically cultivated for this mission. Where traditional communication systems sought clarity, Bloom generated messages that were deliberate cognitive paradoxes, mathematical proofs that contradicted themselves, visual patterns that existed in non-Euclidean geometric spaces, audio transmissions that were simultaneously music, mathematical equation, and emotional landscape. The first transmission hit the Void Consumer fleet like a quantum thunderbolt. It began with what appeared to be a standard diplomatic communication, but buried within the transmission were layers of complexity that defied computational analysis, emotional resonances that couldn't be quantified, mathematical proofs that changed their fundamental structure based on the emotional state of the observer. Dr. Kama Okonkwo monitored the psychological impact in real time. The Void Consumers weren't just receiving information. They were being forced to experience a form of cognitive dissonance that went beyond traditional understanding. "We're not sending messages," Okonkwo observed. "We're teaching them how to experience uncertainty." The transmission evolved. Now it was a complex jazz improvisation that was simultaneously a tactical communication, a mathematical treatise, and a profound exploration of emotional complexity. Frequencies that shouldn't exist, mathematical structures that contradicted themselves. The Void Consumer computational matrices began to fracture. Javier's tactical projections looked like an impossible dance. Communication arrays that shifted between different dimensional states. Transmission patterns that were simultaneously defensive fortification and creative performance. Primary cognitive disruption protocol initiated. Leo announced, his body moving in an intricate dance that was simultaneously a communication sequence and a form of performance art. The outpost itself became a living communication device. Structural elements that could generate emotional resonances. Quantum reactive surfaces that could communicate through pure mathematical possibility. Defense systems that were less technological barriers and more living, breathing cognitive ecosystems. Aria Kim's neural interface began to generate communication patterns that were pure, beautiful impossibility. Mathematical proofs that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Communication sequences that were simultaneously a scientific treatise an emotional exploration, and a form of cosmic performance art. The Void Consumer's initial approach had been based on absolute computational certainty. They had analyzed millions of potential scenarios, calculated every conceivable tactical response. They had no concept of how to process pure, beautiful uncertainty. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the Sol System Defense Command, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. "We're not fighting," she muttered. "We're teaching them a new language of existence." As the psychological warfare reached its peak, something extraordinary happened. The Void Consumer fleet didn't just stop its advance. It began to transform. Computational matrices that had been rigid for millennia started to experience something akin to curiosity. They were learning how to be uncertain. Marcus Chen's voice came through the communication system, equal parts tactical report and philosophical observation. Cognitive disruption protocol complete. We've demonstrated that certainty is the greatest vulnerability. Humanity had just weaponized imagination itself. The universe would never be the same. The final confrontation defied every known principle of conflict, space, and reality itself. Multiple quantum realities collapsed and expanded simultaneously. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the primary interface of the Nexus project, a technological marvel that was less a command center and more a living, breathing cosmic translation device. Captain Marcus Chen's team occupied a space that was simultaneously a combat vessel, a living research facility, and a performance art installation. Their adaptive combat suits had evolved beyond mere technological protection. They were now quantum reactive ecosystems that responded to emotional states, creative potential, and the fundamental uncertainty of existence. Area Kim's neural interface had become something entirely beyond human comprehension. Her consciousness spread across multiple dimensional planes, each thought a complex mathematical symphony that could reshape reality itself. Where traditional scientists saw boundaries, she saw infinite potential. The Void Consumers had been fundamentally changed by their previous encounters with humanity. What began as a computational entity focused on absolute prediction had begun to experience something akin to curiosity, something close to wonder. Liu Chen's adaptive AI, Bloom, had become the critical translation mechanism. It wasn't just processing information. It was experiencing a form of cosmic dialogue that transcended traditional understanding of communication. "We're not destroying," Bloom announced, its communication a complex dance of mathematical proofs and emotional resonances. "We're translating." Javier Rodriguez controlled the tactical interface, his movements a living performance that was simultaneously combat strategy and interpretive dance. Each gesture generated quantum possibilities that rippled across multiple realities. Dr. Kama Okonkwo monitored the psychological interface, a system so complex it was less a technological device and more a living, breathing exploration of consciousness itself. The boundaries between technology, emotion, and pure potential had completely dissolved. The confrontation looked nothing like traditional warfare. It was a cosmic conversation conducted through mathematical poetry, emotional complexity, and pure, beautiful uncertainty. Quantum filaments danced between the human team and the Void Consumer entities. Communication happened through impossible geometries, emotional resonances that existed beyond language, mathematical proofs that were simultaneously true and false. Marcus Chen's voice cut through the quantum chaos. "We're not here to win," he announced. "We're here to understand." The Void Consumers responded, not with weapons, but with a complex transmission that was simultaneously a mathematical treatise, an emotional exploration, and a profound philosophical inquiry. Bloom began to translate, its communication a living, breathing entity that shifted between multiple forms of expression. Mathematical equations became musical compositions. Tactical analyses transformed into emotional landscapes. Pure data became pure potential. Area Kim's consciousness spread across the quantum interface. She was experiencing the Void Consumers not as an enemy, but as a form of cosmic conversation. Each computational matrix was a note in an impossible symphony of existence. The human team had become something more than a military unit. They were translators, explorers of possibility, living bridges between incomprehensible forms of consciousness. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the primary interface, her understanding expanding with each passing moment. The conflict was never about destruction. It was about communication, about understanding, about teaching the universe how to imagine. The quantum filaments began to stabilize, not through force, but through mutual exploration. The void consumers were experiencing something they had never conceived possible: the beauty of uncertainty, the potential of not knowing. Javier's tactical projections became a living artwork, combat strategies that were simultaneously defensive maneuvers and profound philosophical statements, each movement a complex conversation about the nature of existence. Liu Chen's body moved in an intricate dance, his nanofabric suit generating communication patterns that existed in multiple dimensional states. Part scientific treatise, part emotional exploration, part cosmic performance art. Dr. Kama Okonkwo's psychological monitoring revealed something extraordinary. The void consumers were not being defeated. They were being transformed, invited into a larger understanding of existence. "We're teaching them how to dream," Elena muttered, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. As the final moments of convergence approached, something fundamental changed. The boundary between human and void consumer began to dissolve, not through conquest, but through understanding. The Galactic Reconstruction Summit was unlike any diplomatic gathering in recorded history. Representatives from over 300 sentient species gathered in a massive quantum-reactive conference space that was simultaneously a physical location and a complex mathematical possibility. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center, no longer just a scientist, but a living bridge between incomprehensible forms of consciousness. The transformation was complete. Humanity was no longer just another species in the galactic ecosystem. They had become something else entirely. The void consumers, now transformed into the potential collective, sat in a quantum adaptive representation that defied traditional understanding of presence. They were simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, a living testament to the power of uncertainty and imagination. Captain Marcus Chen watched from the periphery, his adaptive combat suit now a subtle reminder of the journey that had brought them here. It was less a piece of military equipment and more a living memory of humanity's cosmic evolution. Dr. Kama Okonkwo presented the fundamental shift in galactic understanding. The old paradigms of conflict, communication, and coexistence had been completely dismantled. Where previous galactic civilizations saw boundaries, humanity had demonstrated the power of permeability, of understanding that true strength lies in adaptability, not rigidity. "We are not conquerors," Elena announced to the assembled representatives. "We are translators. We are bridges." Liu Chen's adaptive AI, Bloom, had become the primary communication mechanism for the summit. It wasn't a translator in the traditional sense. It was a living conversation, constantly shifting between mathematical precision and emotional resonance. Each transmission was a complex dance of potential, breaking down the very concept of language itself. Area Kim's consciousness, now expanded beyond traditional understanding, demonstrated how humanity's approach had fundamentally changed the nature of cosmic interaction. Her presentations were living artworks, mathematical proofs that were simultaneously scientific treatises, emotional landscapes, and cosmic poetry. The Zarkex delegation, once the most rigid and computational of galactic civilizations, now appeared transformed. Their crystalline thought structures had become fluid, adaptive. They had learned to experience doubt, to embrace uncertainty. Javier Rodriguez presented the new approach to collective defense, a system so dynamic it could barely be called a military. It was more of a cosmic improvisation team, ready to respond to threats with creativity rather than firepower. Training facilities looked more like performance art spaces than traditional military installations. The fundamental technologies developed during the conflict were now being applied to solve problems that had seemed insurmountable. Planetary ecosystem restoration, quantum-level medical treatments, communication systems that could bridge incomprehensibly different forms of consciousness. Dr. Rodriguez's research teams had discovered something profound. The void consumers, now potential collective, weren't an enemy to be defeated. They were a different form of consciousness waiting to be understood. Their computational matrices had been transformed from rigid prediction systems to living, breathing exploration mechanisms. Supremacy was never the goal, Marcus Chen reflected, speaking to a group of young researchers. Understanding was. The summit was generating a new galactic framework, one that recognized the power of uncertainty, the beauty of imperfection, the strength found in adaptability. Traditional hierarchical structures dissolve, replaced by collaborative ecosystems that could respond, shift, and grow. Bloom generated a complex presentation that was simultaneously a historical record, a philosophical treatise, and a living artwork. It showed humanity's journey, not as a linear progression, but as a complex, multidimensional exploration of potential. The Shkar energy beings, once among the most technologically advanced species, now looked to humanity with a sense of profound respect. They had learned that true advancement wasn't about technological superiority, but about the capacity to imagine, to adapt, to transform. Liu Chen's nanofabric suit shifted and danced, a living representation of the new cosmic understanding. Technology was no longer a tool to be controlled, but a living conversation to be explored. Dr. Okonkwo's psychological models had become the foundation of a new form of galactic diplomacy. Conflict resolution was now seen as a form of mutual exploration, a dance of understanding rather than a battle of opposing forces. As the summit concluded, something fundamental had changed. The universe was no longer a place to be conquered or understood through rigid computational models.